The small ship spun out of control as it fell through the atmosphere of the strange planet below. Inside the cockpit, Zaravel Nathi gripped the control panels with her crystalline fingers, trying to stop the violent shaking that rattled her bones. Her skin, normally a beautiful blue-white color with glowing lines running through it, had turned pale with fear. The lights under her skin flickered weakly like dying stars. Her ship had been fine just hours ago when she left the space station near Centauri Prime. As a diplomatic courier for the Etherian Council, she carried important messages between the great civilizations of the galaxy. It was supposed to be a simple job, flying from one station to another with sealed documents. But space pirates had attacked her small vessel just as she jumped into hyperspace. The attack damaged her quantum drive, and now she found herself falling toward this unknown world. Zara had heard of this planet before. The other species called it Haven's Edge, a small colony world on the very edge of civilized space. Only humans lived there, and everyone knew humans were barely worth noticing. They were a young race that had only recently learned to travel between stars. Most galactic species thought they were too violent and stupid to join the great civilizations. The Etherian Council had voted many times to keep humans out of galactic affairs. Now Zara was about to crash on their world, and she felt sick with worry. What would these primitive beings do to her? Would they try to hurt her or sell her to slavers? She had heard terrible stories about human cruelty and their love of violence. Her people always said humans were no better than wild animals that had learned to use tools. The ship's warning system screamed at her as the ground rushed up to meet her. She could see forests and mountains below, but no sign of cities or space, ports. This looked like the wild part of the planet, far from any settlements. That might be good or bad, she thought. Good, because no humans would find her right away, but bad because she needed help to repair her ship. Zara pulled hard on the controls, trying to find somewhere safe to land. Her ship was falling too fast, and the engines were barely working. She saw a small clearing between the trees and aimed for it, hoping the soft ground would cushion her landing. The ship hit the earth with a terrible crash that threw her forward against her safety straps. When the world stopped spinning, Zara found herself hanging upside down in her pilot's seat. Smoke filled the cockpit, and sparks flew from broken control panels. She could smell burning metal and the sharp scent of leaking fuel. Her left leg hurt badly, and when she looked down, she saw blood on her crystalline skin. The crash had cracked her leg, and the glowing lines under her skin were dim and flickering. She tried to move but found herself trapped. Part of the ship's ceiling had bent down during the crash, pinning her leg under twisted metal. Every time she tried to pull free, waves of pain shot through her body. The smoke was getting thicker, and she could hear small fires crackling somewhere in the ship. Zara reached for her emergency communicator, hoping to call for help from her people. But when she pressed the button, nothing happened. The device was broken, its screen cracked and dark. All around her, the ship's systems were failing one by one. The lights went out, leaving her in darkness except for the weak glow from her own skin. She tried not to panic, but fear crept into her heart like cold water. She was trapped on a primitive world, hurt and alone, with no way to call for help. Her people would not look for her for days, maybe weeks. By then she might be dead. The air in the ship was getting harder to breathe, and she could feel her strength leaving her body. Outside she could hear strange sounds, the calls of alien birds and the rustle of wind through unfamiliar trees. This world was so different from her home, where everything was made of crystal and light. Here, everything seemed rough and wild, just like the humans who lived here. As the hours passed, Zara's condition grew worse. The pain in her legs spread through her whole body, and breathing became harder. The smoke made her cough, and each cough sent new waves of pain through her chest. She tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled at her like a heavy blanket. She thought about her family back, home on Etheria Prime, wondering if she would ever see them again. Her mother had warned her about taking dangerous missions to the outer worlds, but Zara had wanted to prove herself as a capable courier. Now she wished she had listened and stayed safe on the home world. The ship's hull creaked and groaned around her, damaged metal settling into new positions. Small pieces of debris fell from the ceiling, and she could hear fuel still dripping somewhere in the darkness. If a fire started, she would have no way to escape. The thought made her struggle again against the metal trapping her leg, but she was too weak now to break free. As night fell on the strange world, Zara felt her consciousness slipping away. The glowing lines under her skin grew dimmer, a sign that her life force was fading. In her delirium, she thought she saw lights moving between the trees outside her broken ship. But that had to be her imagination playing tricks on her. What kind of creature would be moving around in these dark woods? She closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for death, far from home and family, on a world full of dangerous primitives who would probably never even know she had been there. Faye. Last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of footsteps crunching through the leaves outside her ship coming closer. Jake Morrison was checking his mining equipment when he saw the streak of fire across the morning sky. He had been a mechanic and engineer on Haven's Edge for 8 years now, ever since he left the military, and he knew the difference between a meteor and a crashing ship. This was definitely a ship, and it was coming down somewhere in the forest near his workshop. Most people would have called the colonial authorities and let them handle it, but Jake was curious by nature. He had served as a combat engineer in the Earth Defense Force before coming to this frontier world, and his training had taught him to investigate unknown situations carefully. He grabbed his toolkit and medical supplies, then climbed into his old ground vehicle to follow the smoke trail. The crash site was about 5 miles from his workshop in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. As Jake approached, he could see the wreckage of a small ship that looked nothing like human technology. The hull was smooth and curved in strange ways, and it seemed to be made of some kind of metal that shifted color in the sunlight. This was definitely an alien vessel. Jake parked his vehicle at the edge of the clearing and approached on foot, moving carefully and watching for any signs of danger. The ship was badly damaged, with one side crushed against a large boulder and the other side twisted and torn. Smoke rose from several holes in the hull, and he could smell the sharp scent of burning electronics. He walked around the ship looking for a way inside. On the far side, he found what looked like an airlock door that had been thrown open during the crash. Jake pulled out his flashlight and peered into the dark interior. The ship was small inside, mostly just a cockpit and a small cargo area. And hanging upside down in the pilot's seat was something that made his breath catch in his throat. It looked like a person, but definitely not human. The being had pale blue skin that seemed to glow softly from within, with lines of light running under the surface like glowing veins. The skin looked hard and smooth, almost like living crystal. It was clearly female in shape, wearing a form-fitting suit that looked more advanced than anything humans had ever made. Jake could see that she was hurt. Her left leg was trapped under twisted metal, and there was blue blood on her crystalline skin. Her breathing was shallow and quick, and the glowing lines under her skin were very dim. She was unconscious, but Jake could tell she was still alive. For a moment he hesitated. This was obviously an alien being, and he had no idea what her people might be like. They could be dangerous enemies of humanity, or they might have diseases that could kill him. But looking at her trapped and hurt in the wreckage, Jake felt the same urge to help that had driven him to become a medic in the military. He climbed into the ship and assessed the situation. The metal trapping her leg was part of a support beam that had bent during the crash. Jake thought he could cut through it with his plasma torch, but he would have to be very careful not to hurt her more. First, though, he needed to check her injuries and make sure she was stable enough to move. Jake had treated wounded soldiers of many different species during the border conflicts, so he had some experience with non-human biology. This being's skin felt warm to the touch, and he could feel a steady pulse in her wrist, though it was much faster than a human pulse. Her breathing seemed labored, probably from smoke inhalation and shock. Working carefully in the cramped space, Jake used his plasma torch to cut through the metal beam holding her leg. The work was slow and precise, and sweat dripped into his eyes as he concentrated on not cutting too close to her trapped limb. When the metal finally parted, he was able to gently lift her leg free. The alien woman stirred as Jake lifted her. From the pilot's seat, her eyes opening for a moment. They were large and completely black, like deep pools of night sky. She looked at him with what seemed like fear and confusion, making sounds in a language he could not understand. Then her eyes closed again, and she went limp in his arms. Jake carried her out of the wrecked ship and laid her gently on a blanket beside his vehicle. In the sunlight, he could see her injuries more clearly. Her leg was badly bruised and possibly broken, and there were several cuts on her arms and face. The glowing lines under her skin were very faint, which he guessed was not a good sign. He started by cleaning and bandaging her wounds with supplies from his medical kit. Her blue blood clotted much like human blood, which was encouraging. The cuts were not too deep, and they stopped bleeding once he cleaned them properly. The leg was more serious. He could feel that one of the bones was cracked, but not completely broken. Jake made a splint for her leg using materials from his toolkit, then wrapped it carefully to keep the bone stable. He gave her water mixed with electrolyte supplements, dripping it slowly into her mouth. She swallowed reflexively, which told him her body was still functioning normally. When he had done everything he could with basic first aid, Jake faced a difficult decision. He could take her to the Colonial Medical Center, but that would mean turning her over to the authorities. They would probably treat her as a valuable specimen to be studied rather than a patient to be healed. And if her people came looking for her, they might see that as an act of aggression. Instead, Jake decided to take her to his workshop. He had a clean room there where he did precision work on delicate electronics, and it would be private and safe. He could take better care of her there while trying to figure out how to contact her people. He lifted the alien woman gently and placed her in the back of his vehicle, making sure she was secure and comfortable for the ride. As he drove back toward his workshop, Jake found himself wondering what kind of being she was and where she had come from. Her ship was clearly more advanced than anything humans had built, which meant she came from one of the older galactic civilizations. But right now, none of that mattered. She was hurt and alone, far from home, and she needed help. Jake had always believed that when someone was in trouble, you helped them if you could. It did not matter if they were human or alien, friend or stranger. That was just the right thing to do. Zara woke up 3 days later in a place she did not recognize. Instead of the twisted metal of her crashed ship, she found herself lying on a soft bed in a clean room with white walls. Sunlight streamed through a window, and she could hear the sound of tools and machinery from somewhere nearby. Her leg was wrapped in clean bandages, and the pain had faded to a dull ache. She sat up carefully, looking around the room with confusion and growing alarm. Where was she? Had the colonial authorities captured her? But this did not look like a prison or a laboratory. The room was simple but comfortable, with basic furniture and what looked like medical equipment nearby. Someone had been taking care of her. The door opened, and Zara tensed as a human male entered carrying a tray of food. She recognized him as the one who had pulled her from the wreckage, though she had been barely conscious at the time. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and kind eyes. His clothes were simple work clothing, stained with oil and dirt. He moved slowly and kept his hands visible, as if he knew she might be frightened. "You're awake," Jake said softly, setting the tray on a small table near the bed. "How are you feeling?" Zara did not understand his words, but his tone was gentle and non-threatening. She had expected humans to be brutal and aggressive, but this one seemed different. Still, she pressed herself against the far wall, watching him warily. Her people had always taught her that humans were dangerous primitives who could not be trusted. Jake seemed to understand her fear. He backed away from the bed and sat down in a chair across the room, giving her space. He pointed to himself and said clearly, "Jake." Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in a questioning look. Zara hesitated for a long moment. Should she tell this primitive her name? But he had saved her life and cared for her injuries when he could have left her to die or turned her over to his authorities. Maybe he deserved to know who she was. "Zara," she said quietly, touching her chest. Jake smiled and nodded. "Zara. That's a beautiful name." He pointed to the food on the tray. "Are you hungry?" She looked at the food with suspicion. It was nothing like the energy supplements her people ate. There were fruits and vegetables, bread, and what looked like cooked meat. How could she trust food prepared by a primitive being? But her stomach was empty, and she needed strength to heal. Jake seemed to notice her hesitation. He took a piece of fruit from the tray and ate it himself, showing her it was safe. Then he offered her the tray again. Slowly, carefully, Zara reached for a piece of bread. It tasted strange but not unpleasant, and her hungry body welcomed the nourishment. Over the next few days, Jake visited her regularly, bringing food and checking on her injuries. He changed her bandages with surprising skill, and Zara began to realize that his medical knowledge was better than she had expected from a primitive. Her leg was healing well under his care. Jake also tried to communicate with her, using simple words and gestures. He taught her basic human words like water, food, and sleep. In return, she taught him a few words in her own language. It was slow progress, but they began to understand each other better. Zara found herself studying Jake when he was not looking. He worked long hours in his workshop, repairing machinery and building things with his hands. Through the window, she could see him welding metal and working with complex electronics. His tools were crude compared to Etherian technology, but he used them with great skill and intelligence. What surprised her most was his kindness. Jake never asked for anything in return for his help. He shared his food without complaint, even though she could see he did not have much. He gave her his own books to read when she grew bored, and he brought her flowers from outside to brighten her room. These were not the actions of a brutal primitive. One evening, Jake was working on something at a table in her room. Zara watched, him carefully examining a piece of her ship's communication system that he had salvaged from the wreck. With simple human tools, he was trying to repair the delicate alien technology. She was amazed to see him actually making progress. "You are fixing it?" she asked in her broken human speech. Jake looked up and nodded. "Trying to. I think if I can bypass this damaged circuit and reroute the power flow through these secondary pathways, it might work again." Zara was shocked. Jake understood the basic principles of her people's technology, even though humans were supposed to be centuries behind the Etherians in scientific knowledge. She watched him work and found herself offering suggestions, pointing to different components and explaining their functions in the few human words she knew. Working together, they managed to get the communicator partially working. It could not send messages across space yet, but it could at least power up and display information. Jake was as excited as a child with a new toy, asking Zara to explain how different parts worked. That night, Zara lay in bed thinking about everything she had learned. Jake had lost his family in a pirate attack years ago, but he bore no anger toward alien species. He had left his military service to live peacefully on this frontier world, but he still risked his own safety to help a stranger. He was intelligent and skilled, but he never boasted or demanded recognition for his abilities. These were not the qualities her people had taught her to expect from humans. They spoke of human violence and stupidity, but Jake showed wisdom and compassion. They said humans were selfish and greedy, but Jake gave freely without expecting anything back. They claimed humans were primitive, but Jake's workshop was full of clever solutions to complex problems. Zara began to wonder if her people were wrong about humans. Maybe they had judged an entire species based on incomplete information. Maybe there was more to these beings than anyone realized. The next morning, Jake brought news that worried them both. He had heard radio chatter about colonial security, teams asking questions about the crashed alien ship. Someone had reported seeing the wreck, and now the authorities were looking for it and any survivors. "We need to get your communicator working soon," Jake said seriously. "If your people can come get you, that would be safer than letting the colonial government find you." Zara felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to go home to her family and her comfortable life on Etheria Prime. But another part of her was not ready to leave this place where she had learned so much about humans and about herself. Jake had shown her that everything she thought she knew about his species might be wrong. More importantly, if she left now, her people would never know the truth about humans. They would continue to dismiss them as primitive and dangerous, never realizing what they were missing. The galaxy was full of advanced civilizations that shared technology and knowledge, but humans were kept out because of prejudice and fear. That seemed terribly unfair to Zara now. Jake deserved better than to be ignored and dismissed by the galactic community. His people deserved a chance to show what they could contribute to the larger universe. The sound of vehicles approaching woke Zara from her afternoon rest. Through the window, she could see 3 military trucks rolling up the dirt road toward Jake's workshop. Armed soldiers in corporate security uniforms jumped out and began surrounding the building. Her heart pounded with fear as she realized the colonial authorities had found them. Jake burst into her room, his face grim with worry. "We have to go now," he said urgently, helping her to her feet. "Corporate security is here and they're not here to help." Zara could walk now, though her leg was still weak. Jake had made her a simple crutch from scrap metal and she could move around his workshop without too much pain. But running through the forest would be much harder, especially with armed soldiers chasing them. "You should leave me," she said in her still imperfect human speech. "I am the one they want. You will be safe if you give me to them." Jake stared at her, as if she had suggested something crazy. "I'm not leaving you with them. Do you know what Meridian Corporation does to alien technology they find? They study it, break it apart, and sell whatever they learn to the highest bidder. They'd treat you the same way." Before Zara could argue, the front door of the workshop exploded inward. Soldiers poured through the opening, their weapons raised and ready. A tall man in an expensive uniform followed them, his cold eyes scanning the room like a predator looking for prey. "I am Commander Cole Bennett of Meridian Corporate Security," the man announced in a harsh voice. "We have reports of an alien crash survivor being harbored in this facility. Surrender the specimen immediately, and you will not be harmed." Jake stepped in front of Zara, shielding her with his body. "There's no one here but me, Commander. You're welcome to look around, but you won't find what you're looking for." Bennett smiled without warmth. "Mr. Morrison, we know you removed something from the crash site 5 days ago. Our sensors detected alien biological signatures in this building. You have 30 seconds to produce the specimen, or we will search every inch of this place." "Search all you want," Jake said calmly. "But I'm not handing anyone over to Meridian Corporation." Bennett's face darkened with anger. "You're harboring valuable alien technology, Morrison. That makes you guilty of theft of corporate assets and violation of colonial security protocols. Stand aside, or we will move you aside." Jake did not move. Behind him, Zara felt a wave of amazement at his courage. This human was willing to face armed soldiers to protect her, even though he gained nothing from helping her. Her own people would have handed her over immediately to avoid trouble with the authorities. "Take him down," Bennett ordered his soldiers. The fight was brutal and one-sided. Jake was skilled from his military training, but he was one man against 6 armed soldiers. He managed to knock down 2 of them before the others overwhelmed him with shock weapons. As Jake fell to the floor, twitching from electrical burns, Zara felt rage build in her chest like a burning flame. "Stop!" she shouted, stepping out from behind an overturned table. "I am here. Leave him alone." Bennett's eyes lit up with greedy satisfaction as he saw her. "There you are, specimen. You're coming with us for detailed study. Meridian Corporation has great interest in learning about your technology and biology." Zara looked down at Jake, who was trying to push himself up from the floor despite his injuries. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, and his hands shook from the shock weapon's effects, but his eyes were still fierce with determination to protect her. "If I come with you, will you leave him unharmed?" she asked Bennett. "That depends on how cooperative you are," Bennett replied with a cruel smile. Before anyone could stop her, Zara dove toward Jake's workbench and grabbed the partially repaired communicator. Her fingers flew over the alien controls, activating the emergency beacon that would call for help from her people. The device might not be strong enough to reach across space, but it was their only hope. Bennett's soldiers grabbed her before she could do anything else, but the beacon was already transmitting. Somewhere in space, if they were lucky, an Etherian ship might pick up the signal and come to investigate. "Destroy that device," Bennett ordered. "We can't have alien reinforcements arriving before we're finished here." But Jake struggled to his feet and threw himself at the soldier reaching for the communicator. "Run, Zara!" he shouted. "Get to the, forest!" The workshop erupted in chaos as Jake fought desperately to buy her time. He was badly outnumbered, but his military training served him well. He used furniture as weapons and shields, turning his own workspace into a battlefield. Tools and equipment flew through the air as soldiers tried to corner him. Zara hesitated at the back door, torn between escaping and helping Jake fight. But she could see he was losing. More soldiers were arriving outside, and Jake was already wounded and exhausted. The only way she could help him now was to stay free long enough for her people to arrive. She ran into the forest, her injured leg slowing her down, but carrying her deeper into the wilderness. Behind her, she could hear shouting and the sound of weapons fire. Jake was still fighting, still trying to protect her even though it might cost him his life. For 2 days, Zara hid in the forest while corporate security teams hunted for her. She had learned enough about human wilderness survival from Jake to find water and shelter, but food was scarce and her leg grew weaker. Several times, search teams came close enough that she could hear their voices, but she managed to stay hidden. On the 3rd day, she heard the distinctive sound of Etherian ship engines approaching from space. Her beacon had worked. Her people had come for her, just as Jake had hoped they would. But as relief flooded through her, she also felt deep worry about what had happened to the human who had risked everything to save her. The Etherian rescue ship landed in the same clearing where her original vessel had crashed. Zara made her way, there as quickly as she could, her heart pounding with hope and fear. When she finally reached the landing site, she saw familiar faces from her own people waiting for her. But she also saw Jake there, held at gunpoint by Commander Bennett and his soldiers. The human looked terrible, with fresh bruises and cuts covering his face and arms. But his eyes were still defiant, still full of the courage that had protected her for so many days. "Ah, there's our missing specimen," Bennett called out as Zara appeared at the edge of the clearing. "Your alien friends arrived just in time to witness what happens to humans who interfere with corporate business." Zara saw Bennett raise his weapon toward Jake, and she knew she had to act quickly. Everything Jake had taught her about human courage and sacrifice was about to be put to the test. Now it was her turn to risk everything to protect someone she cared about. Zara ran toward the center of the clearing, placing herself between Bennett's weapon and Jake. "Stop!" she shouted in her own language to the Etherian rescue team. "This human protected me. He saved my life. Captain Velneth, leader of the rescue." Mission looked at her with confusion and mild disgust. He was an old soldier with crystalline skin that had hardened to deep blue with age, and his glowing lines pulsed with authority. "Step away from the primitive courier Velnathi. We will deal with these humans appropriately." "No," Zara said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself. "Jake Morrison is under my protection. If you harm him, you harm me." Bennett laughed, harshly. "Your alien friends don't seem to care much about human life, specimen. They're just as ruthless as we expected." But Zara was not listening to the corporate commander. She was watching the faces of her own people, seeing the same prejudice and dismissal that she herself had felt just days ago. They looked at Jake the way she might look at a dangerous animal, something to be avoided or eliminated if it became troublesome. "Captain Velneth," she said formally, using the diplomatic protocols she had learned as a courier. "I request immediate medical treatment for this human. He has suffered injuries while protecting an Etherian citizen from unlawful detention." The captain's glowing lines flickered with annoyance. The primitive chose to interfere in matters beyond his understanding. His injuries are his own responsibility. Jake, still held at gunpoint, managed to speak despite his pain. "Zara, just go with your people. You're safe now. That's all that matters." But Zara had made her decision. She turned to face her captain directly, her own lines beginning to glow brighter with determination. I invoke the right of testament under Etherian law. As a witness to events affecting galactic relations, I demand a formal hearing before the Council. Captain Velneth looked shocked. The right of testament was an ancient law that required the Council to hear testimony about important matters, even from junior couriers. It had not been used in centuries, but it was still valid. You cannot be serious, the captain said. You would invoke ancient law to protect a primitive. I invoke it to tell the truth, Zara replied. The Council makes decisions about humanity based on incomplete information. I have lived among them, and I have seen what they are really like. Bennett was growing impatient with the alien conversation. Enough talk. We're taking both of you into custody for questioning. But as he raised his weapon, Captain Velneth moved with lightning speed. His own energy weapon appeared in his hand, and Bennett's gun was blasted from his grip before the human could react. The other Etherian soldiers quickly surrounded the corporate security team, their advanced weapons, making resistance pointless. The courier is under Etherian protection, Captain Velneth announced coldly. Any attempt to harm her will be considered an act of war against the Etherian Republic. Bennett and his soldiers found themselves outgunned and surrounded. They had no choice but to retreat, leaving Jake and Zara with the Etherian rescue team. But Zara could see the anger in Bennett's face as he withdrew, and she knew this was not over. The journey back to Etheria Prime took 3 days, during which the ship's medical systems healed Jake's injuries with technology far beyond human capabilities. Zara spent most of the trip sitting beside his recovery bed, telling him about her world and her people. Jake listened with fascination, asking intelligent questions about Etherian science and culture. Captain Velneth and the other soldiers watched these conversations with growing unease. They had expected the human to be crude and violent, but Jake was curious and thoughtful. He showed genuine interest in learning about different species and cultures, and his questions revealed a sharp intelligence that surprised them. When they reached Etheria Prime, Zara was summoned immediately before the full council. The great chamber was filled with hundreds of senior Etherians, their crystalline bodies glowing with power and authority. At the center sat the Grand Speaker, eldest and wisest of their people. Courier Velnathi, the Grand Speaker's voice echoed through the chamber. You have invoked an ancient right to bring testimony before this council. Speak, and let us judge the worth of your words. Zara stood straight and proud, her own light shining clearly in the vast chamber. Honored counselors, I have lived among humans for many days, and I have seen qualities in them that we have overlooked. They are not the primitives we believe them to be. She told them everything. Jake's skill in repairing alien technology with crude tools. His willingness to risk his life for a stranger who could give him nothing in return. His forgiveness toward the pirates who had killed his family, and his choice to live peacefully rather than seek revenge. His intelligence and curiosity about the wider galaxy. This human could have turned me over to his authorities for profit or recognition, Zara continued. Instead, he protected me at great cost to himself. When faced with superior force, he chose to fight rather than abandon someone who trusted him. These are not the actions of a primitive savage. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. Some counselors seemed intrigued, but others looked skeptical. The Grand Speaker raised a crystalline hand for silence. These are interesting observations, Courier, but one individual cannot represent an entire species. How do we know this human is not an exception among his people? Zara had anticipated this question. I request that the Council send a formal, diplomatic mission to Haven's Edge. Let them observe human society directly instead of judging them from a distance. If I am wrong about their potential, then we lose nothing. But if I am right, we may be excluding a valuable addition to galactic civilization. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some counselors argued that humans were too dangerous and unpredictable to trust. Others pointed out that the Etherian Republic had always prided itself on making decisions based on complete information, not prejudice. Finally, the Grand Speaker called for a vote. All in favor of sending a diplomatic mission to study human society directly? The chamber filled with light as counselors activated their voting crystals. When the lights faded, the result was clear. The motion had passed by a narrow margin. 3. Months later, Zara found herself back on Haven's Edge as part of the first official Etherian diplomatic mission to a human world. Jake had been chosen as their primary liaison, partly because of his experience with aliens, but mostly because of the respect he had earned from Zara and her people. The cultural exchange was not always smooth. Many humans were suspicious of aliens, and many Etherians still considered humans beneath their notice. But slowly, carefully, bridges began to form between the two species. Jake's workshop became an unofficial embassy where human and Etherian engineers worked together on joint projects. The combination of human creativity and Etherian technology produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Other human colonies began requesting their own Etherian advisors, and some young Etherians asked to study human engineering techniques. Zara often sat in Jake's workshop in the evenings, watching him work on new projects with the advanced tools her people had provided. The simple human hoo-ha,